a fair number of people on, and we want to thank you for joining the call. We actually end up having people from all over the world. When we put out this invitation, we thought we'd just have a few people in the Midwest who had some questions that wanted answered, but looks like we got some diverse people around the world growing different crops in different conditions, but all facing soil variability issues. And so we'll try to cover as many questions as we can in the next 45 minutes or so. But if we don't get to them all, please feel free to get back in touch with us to the website, and we'll connect you with Eric or maybe another mapper who has similar conditions as you. But first, my name is Tyler Lund. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing here at Veris Technologies, and we also have Erich Lund, the President of Veris, who's going to join us as we visit with another Erich Eller. We're excited for him to join for a lot of reasons, but one of the big reasons is he's a really progressive consultant, a really big help to his growers in Indiana. He's taken on a lot of new technology, but as he looks at new technology, new management practices, he always asks the question, is this going to benefit my growers? And that's the kind of guy that we all want to hire. And so we thought it'd be good to get his experiences and broadcast that, share that with other people. And he's just a really fun guy. We hoped he'd say yes, and he did. And so we're all going to benefit from that. The other reason we asked him is that Eric was in your shoes about a year ago this time. Last August, I think it was, we had a webinar similar to this, talked about soil variability, how finding that variability can help us reach maximum profitability. When there's untapped variability out there, we can make the most of it by mapping soil. And so he bought a Veris U-Series U3000 in September of last year, and the rest is history, well, very recent history. And we'll let Eric start sharing a little bit about his business and what he does to serve growers in Northeast Indiana. Eric, are you able to get through?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, good.
Good morning, everyone. And I'm a pretty simple guy. Pretty much what has driven me to Veris was trying to find better ways to do things here in Northeast Indiana. One of the challenges that we deal with, I'm going to pick on one specific field that I deal with. It's 150 acres, and the Surgo map shows it's got 22 different soil types. How do we manage that for variable rate seeding, multi-hybrid seeding, variable rate nitrogen, soil sampling, scouting, and this actually does have a center pivot on it. And that's just one farm out of, this gentleman does over 5,000 acres of very similar type soil. So it's giving us a challenge to look at the foundation of where we need to start. I read this article that said mankind survival is based upon the top 6 inches of soil and a few inches of rain a year. So we need to manage that top 6 inches the best way possible for us to be profitable and sustainable long term.
Mm-hmm. That's good. And there's a picture of Eric set up right there. And before I launch into this, it looked like the questions that had been submitted kind of fell into about 4 different categories. We'll take questions in the chat area and ask them as we can. But it seemed like people wanted to know a little bit about your business, Eric.
Okay.
What about the different alternatives and competition? We'll ask the specific questions, but we'll just lump them into these kind of groupings. And then the technical aspects of mapping, the agronomy, the science behind it all. And then the most important is how do we use this data to help our growers make more money? And so we'll go through these different groupings and take some questions at the end and as they come in. But there's your setup, and I grabbed this picture from your Twitter account. There's your crew, it looks like, and getting ready for the season. But all right, here's the first question from Jason, and he asks, what are you charging for your mapping service?
So just for us to run the Veris cart over it, I'm charging $10 an acre.
Okay.
So that's a pretty flat fee, and and several different universities are saying that these soil properties are going to change every 100 to 500 years. So realistically, my plan is to run over these farms once in my lifetime, unless that farm changes hands, and then if the new tenant wants me to run it, I can't share that data because that's the other guy's data. But my plan is really to only run that once in my lifetime, unless that ground changes hands.
It's good to know.
Go ahead.
It's the EC and OM version of the equipment, so he's mapping those really static soil properties that last for a long time. And that rate is really in line with what we've seen from other people with EC and organic matter setup. And if you add on pH, it can be in the $13 to $15 range, and even higher than that. So, all right, good. Eric, what other services or inputs do you offer along with Veris mapping? What else do you sell, or do you sell anything else?
We are independent, so I do not sell seed, fertilizer, or chemical. We do scouting, we do soil testing, we do tissue sampling, and just recommendations in general, helping guys increase their return on investment. I think that pretty much, so anywhere from variable rate seeding maps, variable rate nitrogen, multi-hybrid, all the maps that are needed for that gentleman or lady to, really do a good job variable rating.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good. I grabbed a picture from your Twitter account of you doing some, looks like in-season nitrogen, so making use of that OM layer and doing some late-season nitrogen. Pretty tall corn.
And just so happens that particular field of corn, this was the first pass of nitrogen, and you can see how tall it is and how green it is. But here was the neat thing about that is that had, for the last 30 years, quite a bit of hog manure on it. And so it's really neat, since you brought that up, that we were able to save that gentleman $46 an acre on his nitrogen costs this year.
That's pretty impressive. And that's using the organic matter data and using a nitrogen model, putting it all together for him?
Correct.
All right, cool. How do you sell mapping as a service? What's that conversation look like? How do you, yeah, good follow-up, especially in a down farm economy. What, $3 corn less, how are you getting people to hire you to map their soil?
Yeah. It is a tough first conversation with a guy. So many farmers just have a barrage of products that they can try. And I go at it just a little bit different. So what's really fun is actually I have taken Ziploc baggies of the different major soil types in this area, and I set them out in front of a new customer. And it's funny, you start seeing, guys that deal in soil every day, they like to pick it up and feel it, and they knead it between their fingers. And, next thing you know, you just are talking about soil properties with them and explaining, what you're trying to do. And they're like, over in this ABC field, I do have some of this. And over in, this other farm, I do have some of this. And as you're just talking through stuff and explaining what is EC and CEC and organic matter and the properties that organic matter bring with it, with mineralized nitrogen and water holding capacity, and next thing you know, they're just like, and bring that all back to, why we're doing it with variable rate seeding and variable rate nitrogen, and why management zones maybe versus grids that they're used to. And next thing you know, they're just, and as you educate them, they're just okay, well, let's do these 3 farms. And then, the next year after they've, experienced it more, I've got a very, very high succession rate, like 100%. Once guys have tried 2 or 3 farms, next thing you know, they're giving you, the other 50% that's going into corn, the following year to start Verising in the fall. So it is the first conversation, and getting them to that point is tough, but once they see the value and the return on investment, the second and third time, signing up more of their acres is pretty easy.
Eric, like I mentioned at the beginning, you have only been doing this, you mapped last fall, this spring, and you already started again. How many acres do you think you've covered so far?
At the end of this fall, I'll be about 16,000 acres.
Okay, okay. That's impressive. That's good. It's going to look like we planned this because this next slide I grabbed a picture from, it is actually from Agravista in the United Kingdom, and I think they have a similar sales strategy. This is something we'd like to see guys do is after you've mapped out these soil properties, go take samples, show them to the grower, and ask them, do you really want to manage all these soils from one field like they were the same, or do each of these maybe have a strategy, a seed rate, a nitrogen rate management we should incorporate for those? So that's you
that was a good lead in for that.
That's great. I didn't know that you'd use that, but that's good. It's pretty common and a productive way to demonstrate the value, because a lot of these soils would be in the same 2.5 or 1 hectare grid, same soil survey unit. But all right, back in the fall of 2015, what were some of your biggest concerns about starting out Veris? I mean, this is recent for you. How have those concerns played out?
Well, when I first got graduated from Purdue and came back here, that was the late 1990s, early 2000s, and we were doing some Veris just EC work at the time when I was with an ag retailer. So I had a little bit of Veris knowledge in my head, but took different paths, working for other companies over the last few years. And at the time, we didn't have the technology and the tractor cabs that we have today. If you think about it, we've only had tablets in the industry for less than 5 years. And look what they have done. Look how much we use a tablet in the tractor cab and the combine cab today. So we didn't have that kind of technology to play Veris on through the entire process. But having that knowledge that I had of just EC and then bringing in the organic matter and just how was everything going to tie together that I was trying to package for my business, and how Veris was going to play that foundational role, that was a concern if I was going to be able to pull all this together. And through trials and errors of getting data flowing back and forth to, from Veris into my GIS software, from there into my nitrogen modeling, and just getting the steps worked out and how this was all going to play out was truly one of my biggest concerns. And there were some hiccups and some glitches, but you know what? Through working with enough people, we pretty much got everything ironed out and working now. So it's working pretty good.
That's good. Yeah, and I think that those challenges of data flow are real, and if you're mapping 16,000 acres, yeah, you want it to flow well because that's a lot of data, and we're always working to improve the flow of with APIs and stuff. So we hope to continue that and make it less of an issue. All right. Does your pricing model consider whether a grower buys your other services or products?
No. It doesn't. I truly, since Veris is kind of a one-time across the field, I do have it quote unquote separate from my other programs where I do the soil sampling and the scouting and recommendation. So I do have it set over to the side a little bit since it kind of is a one-time run across the acres.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's say, that we like that. We like people being able to charge what they can, but we do see some folks who, that sell seed, and so they'll maybe do mapping for a little bit less, or people who price. You need to price it at a level that shows the value it's going to provide the grower in the end, and it's a significant value, or at least we think.
Mm-hmm.
I guess this goes back to something you'd asked earlier or answered. Have you calculated the ROI for your customers? What about the payback for even owning a Veris for you?
Well, the payback for me has been tremendous. I did buy the U series, so I already had a UTV, so I didn't have to spend extra dollars to purchase that. So that was one very attractive part of the U series to me. It's very profitable for me to keep owning a Veris. And then the calculated the ROI for your customers. I will have better answers for that question this fall, because we are bringing on a new partner that does help calculate ROIs, and actually was on a webinar with them yesterday directly towards the Veris ROI for customers. So getting better information on that, but I can tell you when we start looking at variable rate seeding, and I know this is information that Eric and Tyler provided, I know in a presentation, and it might be on your website, but for variable rate seeding versus using soil surveys, versus using 2.5 acre grids versus using Veris data, the average net return on variable rate seeding using Veris data over flat rate was like $25 an acre advantage. Mm-hmm. I am also doing some multi-hybrid that you can, what better way to do multi-hybrid than using Veris Fuse data? And I truly believe I will see another 10 to 15 bushel advantage there. So I'm saying on variable rate seeding and multi-hybrid, I'm predicting even at $3, $3.50 corn to see about a $50 an acre advantage to running variable rate seeding and multi-hybrid. Mm-hmm. Using the organic matter map and putting it into a nitrogen model, this year, for the last 2 years that I've used it, I've seen anywhere between $22 and $45 per acre less use of nitrogen, and still maintaining yield. So I'm looking at anywhere for that $10 spend one time of seeing anywhere between $47 and $60 an acre every time that crop is in corn.
That's neat. You've been able to do that. And one of the challenges is calculating the ROI of precision ag, adopting any new precision ag practice, and then also the return over maybe an alternative. And we're going to go into the alternatives and what those are. But the question is also, how much is Veris beneficial over maybe a different map? Hey, Steve asks, and this kind of ties in with you bought the U series before we had the pH option.
Correct.
So we're only able to get the EC and OM. Have you considered adding pH on for pH sampling in the future?
My goal actually is within a year from now to own 2 machines and be running both of them, and the second one will have the pH on it. And I know that I've talked with Tyler and Eric offline on doing some pH alone. So every 4 to 6 years, just going back and testing pH. So that is something that, yes, I'm definitely looking at and need. Yes.
Okay. All right, we're moving into the alternatives section. Trevor in South Dakota asks, if a customer wants to use a USDA soil survey instead of Veris, what should I tell him?
Well, I know that in one of the presentations that Tyler and Eric have put together, they've got 3 slides that I actually print out and put in a 3-ring binder when I'm showing guys this. And it goes all the way back to in Texas. There's like a, I believe like a Model A truck, and a guy using all the instruments available in 1899 to figure out this soil survey. And then again, when all the equipment companies only were smart enough to letter tractors with a letter, you know, we had the John Deere A, B, and D, and G, and International had the H and M. So we're talking in the 50s, they put topography maps with them. Well, you know, when we didn't have a good base to start with, and just adding more stuff to it doesn't make it a good map all of a sudden. So I think once you start showing guys when that stuff was surveyed, and even in their own nomenclature, that there's a plus or minus 5 acres, which think about is roughly 5 football fields, that they could be wrong, and we're trying to RTK on a bad map like that. Just as you start educating and talking with guys through some of this stuff on when some of this was taken and how they did it versus what we have today, and I still, I look at one of the slides that was in one of your presentations, Tyler, where you have, you know, what going to the doctor office looked like in 1950, where you tried to, where that nurse is sitting there talking with you and taking your temperature and dealing with the external symptoms. And now when you go to the doctor and you say, hey, I got this pain in my side, next thing you know, you're getting a CAT scan, an MRI, and they're looking into your body. Well, that's what Veris is doing. We're looking deeper into that problem inside of you and trying to fix the problem and not the symptom.
Nice, nice. That's a really good point.
Sorry, Trevor, that was a long answer to your question.
Well, you know, one of the answers, and I'm not sure if you use this feature on Field Fusion, but Eric, you know,
oh yeah, I use this a lot.
Demonstrate, and what, you know, we don't want to just show a couple key slides when we talk to growers and people who are Veris mapping. We've actually added in our Field Fusion website the ability for you as a mapper to be able to, on every field, display the USDA soil survey and a 2.5 acre grid map, just so you can show them, all right, what would it look like if I had used a soil survey, and they can see how many places that they would have underpopulated or just as costly overpopulated. So it's not a rare thing. I mean, if they did a good job with the tools they had, but they didn't have GPS, and now we've got the tools to actually sense it and look into the soil, like you said. So
it is fun to show growers their map and start talking through it with them. And next thing you know, I've had multiple growers are like, yeah, you're spot on with the way I've been farming this ground for the last 20 years. You caught it. You got it.
Yeah. This next question goes into using seeding recs from grids instead of soil surveys. And you know, like you said, a lot of tractor cabs back in the day didn't have the ability to use some of this technology, but variable rate fertility and spreading has been around for a while, and grid's been used for that. Now, can we use that grid data for our seeding recs, I guess is the question. Looks like Jeff has.
Jeff, yeah, sure, you can use it. But from research that I've seen data from, we can gain about $9 to $10 an acre by actually mapping that and using the management zones coming up from the fused layers of Veris data. So absolutely, you can use that. I'm just trying to gain another $10 for my customers.
Again, that same map that's available for the soil survey is able to show growers, all right, how much variability am I willing to just look over and lump together into one grid. So, all right. Oh, and this is a picture, I guess. This is a Veris mapper who took samples. Just shows how quickly you can go from a hard clay to sand, and we need to map the difference, I guess, is what he's getting at with that. Sample the difference with zones rather than grids. All right. Have you run, or Eric, What would be the advantage of Veris over satellite or aerial imagery such as NDVI for mapping a field?
Well, I did purchase a UAV this year, and this year in Northeast Indiana, it's not uncommon for us to get started around the 15th of April. So we got started actually about the 22nd of April. Guys went out and started planting corn for about a week. Then we started getting some cool, and when I'm saying cool, we actually got some frost. We got rainy. We were put out for 3 weeks during that cold, wet period. And I've got some pictures as I was doing some stand counts of early emergent corn to where you can walk to those zones that I mapped with my Veris, and you can see the different soil types and how emergence came up. Where we had the darker soil that absorbed more sunlight, those didn't need to be replanted. So going back over satellites and aerial imagery, one thing that I am looking at doing is somehow trying to fuse these together, and I don't know what I'm trying to do yet, what I'm trying to get to. But the NDVI, as far as doing for a soil map, I don't know if the NDVI is going to pick it up, because that's measuring the photosynthesis of a plant. So I don't know how you would use both of those to actually get to the advantage that the Veris is giving us of actually mapping 2 foot into the soil on what we're dealing with, versus that aerial imagery is going to maybe do the top couple inches of the soil. So there's advantages to using satellites and aerial imagery for what they're designed for, but I think what the Veris is doing and what those things are designed to do are 2 separate things. So I don't see them as an overlap.
Yeah, Eric, it's Eric here. I think you really hit a couple good points there. We don't see them really as competition. Maybe we should, because there's plenty of people out there saying, oh, you can just do all your soil zones with cheap imagery, but we really see them as complementary as well, that you need a good soil map, and then if you've got aerial imagery or yield data to overlay, that's great. And we're working on some things in field fusion that'll really kind of help even utilize the combination of those data even better. I think you also, it kind of goes back to what you said about the symptoms with the doctor. The satellite image of a crop is looking at symptoms, and just like the doctor in the 1950s used to just take your temperature and ask you where it hurt, and what we can do now is an MRI that really looks inside your body, and we can do an MRI for your soil as well. So I think you really hit some good points there, and just images show a lot of different things. They show the soil properties, but they also show a lot of management factors as well. And I guess here's a picture from Corey Gilbert, one of our good customers here in Kansas, that he tweeted, where he's got an image that looks like the same soil or same thing going on in the image, but when you actually look at the yield, quite a bit difference in yield. So yeah, all these layers are important, and we have to use them in the proper perspective.
Hey, all right, Eric, how much time is invested in mapping a 100-acre field and presenting the results to a farmer?
So for me with the U series, I'm running, I'm going to say pretty close to an average of 40 to 42 acres an hour. And presenting the results to the farmer, that varies upon every farmer, because some guys are very direct and to the point, and other guys, want to spend half a day talking to you about everything. So I'm going to say, so actual mapping time, I'm going to say 2.5, 3 hours, some travel time, something like that, and can be pretty close to that, presenting it to the farmer and just educating him on exactly what is going out there the first time. The second time, after I show guys stuff the first time, I don't, this, you know, and as they continue to grow and give me acres, I don't always present everything to them because they're more apt to trust the data that after the first 100-acre farm. And then once they give you, you know, 300 or 400 more acres, they trust what you're doing, and they just want to see the prescriptions that's coming from it then.
Makes sense.
That's great.
Do you interpret the maps for the farmer and make recommendations, or does he use an outside agronomist?
We try and keep that all in-house as much as possible. You know, that is part of the services we are offering. I do have a couple gentlemen that have just hired me as a mapper, and I knew that up front. But for the most part, yeah, I try and keep as much of that in-house as possible. So.
Okay. I guess going back to this question, we got to follow up. It makes sense. What is the field survey transect width? PJ wants to know. What are your transect dimensions between passes?
Oh, we were running on 60-foot centers.
Okay.
So we actually map at 120, then come back and split the 120.
All right, Eric. How is Veris sensing affected by moisture?
And I'm assuming you're saying, so let's go back to 2015. Here in Northeast Indiana, we were extremely dry. And to the point where even guys trying to chisel ground in the fall was burning up points. The ground was so dry and hard. So we actually did stop versing when we hit about 20% moisture left in the ground. And we were, there's some wear parts on the Veris machine that, you know, just like the guys were experiencing trying to do some chiseling, we were going through some wear parts pretty quick. So we knew it was getting hard, and we knew that it was getting borderline on getting too dry. This spring, actually, I got out on some no-till ground pretty early in March, and you know, it was thawed out. We had kind of a mild winter here, but it was thawed out. I have not seen anything that if it's dry enough for me to get across on the gator, it's dry enough for the Veris to sense the soil accurately.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And if I'm wondering if Danny's trying to get at, you know, if two fields have different soil moisture, if one field, I guess, has two different soil moisture conditions, maybe one's soybean stubble, one's corn stubble, or pivot corners, do you map those separately because of soil moisture conditions differences?
Yes. So if, let's say in that 100-acre field, 50 of it was corn, 50 of it was soybeans, those are two separate fields mapped separately.
All right. And then do you combine those later sometimes? Or
depends on if that's what the grower is planning on doing or not.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If he manages those as 50 and 50, they stay separate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. What are the proper soil conditions? I guess this kind of gets at the similar. What are the proper soil conditions for using Veris? When should you absolutely not map using Veris?
Like I said, we found that last fall here, we were starting to get too dry. It was hard to keep the disc actually penetrating the soil. So we were getting some, you know, sometimes the discs were out, sometimes they were, you know, more than 2 inches deep. And so we were starting to get maybe some false readings, and I called it and I said, we're done. And so for me, it's been more of an issue of being too dry than too wet. You know, like I said, if so far, as long as my gator has been able to, not that, make it through.
These are conditions you do not want to map in.
No.
This is not Eric.
This is not even as dry. So you were still able to cover that many acres even though you had an extremely dry fall last year?
Yeah, we actually only covered like 3,200 acres last fall, and I called it. I was like, you know, we're just too dry. We haven't got the moisture, and yeah, we pulled the pin and shut her down.
Eric, would you say that if you can push a soil probe in the ground, just a normal, core sampling probe in the ground, that you can Veris? That's kind of what we suggest to people, or what we've heard is that, if it's too hard to push the soil probe in the ground, it's probably mapping's not going to work either. What?
I would say that's pretty accurate. Yeah, I haven't thought of it that way, but I would say that's pretty accurate.
And this shows an image. It's not necessarily soil conditions, but residue conditions. I think because you're in a gator, you try to stick off of corn stalks, but just saw this from Corey out in eastern Colorado, western Kansas, and some pivot high residue corn, and he's in there about to run into the grain cart. So, if you have to run the equipment, you can get through some conditions like that.
And you do have to be careful about fires. I mean, that's definitely the tractor that's pretty well eliminated. But if you're in any kind of pickup truck or gator, mule, whatever, UTV, you do have to be aware of what crop residue can do to create a problem.
Right.
And have you, maybe this might be for Erich Lund from Veris, but can Veris sensors measure plant available moisture?
Do you get that question, Eric, from growers?
I've never got that question. Typically here in Northeast Indiana, we are in excess moisture more often than not.
Yeah. I think maybe what Ian is asking there, and it's a question that we do get some, especially from the research community, is can you obviously soil texture and soil organic matter, the two main properties we're mapping with these devices, they do relate definitely to soil moisture, moisture holding capacity. And so, yes, indirectly, the maps do relate. We've also done some work on a more technical basis where we pulled deep cores and actually did calibrating with soil texture and plant available water. So, the maps show the variability in plant available water in the field, and we can take it even beyond that. But typically, just these management zones, I think, is what people are after, is help me figure out where to put more seed, not necessarily the specific, soil water, moisture content or plant available water.
And while we're on this kind of technical and maybe different soil questions, how accurate is EC mapping in saline and sodic soils? I'm not sure you deal with that in Indiana, do you, Eric? Do you have?
I think I'm starting to get some internet issues. I'm blinking in and out on you guys a little bit.
Are you? Do you have any saline soils in Indiana?
No, not really.
Yeah.
Well,
conductivity, if you do have those, and so some of our customers in Australia and Canada maybe on the call are wondering about that, definitely high conductivity, very, very high conductivity typically indicates, salinity in the soil, but typically Midwestern soils don't have that problem.
Is it possible to evaluate Veris scan results on the spot in the field?
I mean, obviously, we've got the surface in there, and you can see and track, what you're going through, and so the short answer to that is yes, you can. Especially as, like I said, I skip track every 120 feet and then come back on 60s, and you can see the raw data being put up on the surface screen, and to the point where I can pretty much go, okay, I ought to be hitting this color, and then you're kind of, as you're driving by, especially on a UTV, you're sitting pretty close to the ground, you can start to see green on the screen means this color of soil. And so, yeah, you can. it's not as good as once the data has been sent in and calibrated and stuff like that.
Okay. All right. How do you translate Veris maps in map data into farm management actions? Stan from California. I mean, we've talked some about this. It sounds like you're doing seeding and nitrogen, but
right.
Anything you want to add to that?
Well, and we're also pulling in our zones to go soil sample by. The other nice tool coming out is your in-scouting tool, to where based on all those layers combined, I can bring that layer into my iPhone and actually go scout where there might be a nitrogen leaching or denitrification issue. So I know GPS where to go into that field and find better data that brings back to, translates into my nitrate test to how we manage our nitrogen throughout that field still.
Okay. I just grabbed a couple images of different applications. This is over in Australia. They're spreading gypsum based on the EC map. They have some tight soils that they want to use the gypsum to flocculate, and liming in the UK, Holland maybe, and obviously corn seeding maps. And you just answered this, but do you use the EC data to group areas and take soil samples according to those areas? So you use it for zone sampling?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Do you consider organic matter levels on your EC mapping? Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where the question's going, but you had said earlier that you did EC mapping before in a previous job. How has organic matter influenced, going forward, the way you use the data?
Well, probably the one part that brought me back to Veris was being able to map the organic matter that's highly critical to soil health and soil quality along with the EC. So I don't look at each one of these individual. I look at them as a combination, because we can have a similar EC or CEC rating, and if the organic matter is a 1% or a 5%, that's a totally different soil. So I look at these really as being merged and into one group, and that really tells more of the story of that soil going forward.
Okay. There's a picture of it.
Yeah.
Very different.
And that was within about 100 yards of each other. And if I would have been doing it on a 2.5 acre zone grid, that would have ended up in the same soil sample bag. And at that point, we just blend that and get an average of the two.
Yeah, I don't know what's worse, is getting the average or getting one and treating the other one exactly the opposite way it should be treated.
Right.
All right. This question ties in with something Todd asked in the chat window. How do you show value to a producer where yield mapping isn't being used? Todd asks, I have clients who want to vertebrate seed with multi-year yield average maps. How would you approach the need of Veris over yield data? So how does yield mapping play into your business and into Veris mapping?
Well, in 14, we were extremely wet here. And so it actually drowned it out, probably our highest productive soil, and then, this year we were dry for some periods, and so that soil that's got the higher organic matter and has the water holding capacity is probably going to shine a little bit better. And so we've got two very contrasting years similar to each other. So what is that yield mapping? Where is those zones to make our, if we're standardizing that and using that for a seeding map, do we throw those 2 years out because they're the skews to, is it no more statistically analyzed, good data?
Yeah.
So I mean, we use yield mapping, and I think yield mapping is important so we can track some things to the year end and stuff, but
in the end, it sounds like, you know, from those pictures, you want to manage the soil and choose populations and management strategies for the soil, and yield data can be helpful. And we've done a little bit of work with you, Eric, on this, but we're expanding this offering where we actually incorporate yield data into field fusion zones so we can see how productive are different zones and where there's some opportunities where similar soils but different productivity levels that we should be investigating and seeing how we can raise up the productivity because they have the same yield environment, same soil and topography, but different performance. And so we're looking forward to expanding that and helping incorporate yield data in its use as it is, but letting the soil speak for itself. And I think we actually, yeah, that effect of Mother Nature is real, and even machines, you know, with different combines in the same field, or maybe a hybrid change in the middle of a field, but weather really can throw us for a loop on some looking at yield data and letting it determine zones. All right. What soil sensor seems to have the most value for you? You have EC and OM, so which of those two so far has shown you the most value? Matt wants to know.
Like I said, it's to the point where I don't look at just EC and I don't typically look at just OM. I look at those combined because just one of them doesn't tell the entire story that's going on in the soil type. I think it's a combination. So, Matt, when you're looking at, let's just say, the weather for today, do you just look at temperature, or do you also look at percent of precipitation that's coming? And so just temperature doesn't tell you the entire story of what kind of weather you're going to have today. So I truly think it's a combination of that and not just one by itself.
Okay. Well, I'm looking through for additional questions. I appreciate everybody staying on. We're going to put this recording online if you want to come back to it at all. If you do have more questions, you can ask, email, call. I guess, Eric, lastly, do you have anything, if you had people who are starting out mapping, do you have any advice for them to have success? I mean, you've been at it for a year, and yeah, from all we can tell, you're doing a good job serving your growers and covering acres. What advice would you have for people who are getting into this or considering?
I would say just be confident in what your approach is, and take the stance that you want to educate growers, because I would say that's the biggest hurdle, is actually educating everybody. And but just be confident in what you're doing, because this does work, and it may take a little time. This isn't a 2-month thing that all of a sudden everybody's just going to call you out of the blue. You know, you still got to keep your nose to the grindstone and just keep educating.
Eric, thank you very much for participating in this, and thank you to all who have been on the call. It looks like we've had a number of people around the world on the call, and we just appreciate your interest in Veris and in improving soil maps for your customers around the world. And Eric, thank you again. We'll post this online and look forward to continuing conversations as we go forward.